The wind that night carried a strange smell through the pines. A mix of wood smoke, damp earth, and the sour temps of swill poured into a wooden trough. It was the kind of scent a man could follow without meaning to, the kind that tugged at something inside him and made him wonder who was surviving out here on the edge of the old frontier. The land stretched quiet and wide, black silhouettes of the San Juan peaks standing guard against a pale half-moon. In that silence, the crunch of a boot step sounded like thunder, and the steady rhythm of a horse's breath seemed louder than the rustling cottonwoods by the creek. The lone rider moved slow, scanning the shadows. His dark hair, tied back with a strip of leather, caught a faint gleam of moonlight. His eyes sharp, patient, and wary missed nothing. This was no stranger to hunger, nor to the weight of wandering. This was an Apache, a man cut loose from the broken trails of his people, now riding without tribe, without banner, without promise of welcome from any settlement, east or west. Folks whispered about such men. Some called them ghosts of the old wars. Others called them drifters, dangerous and proud. He carried those whispers the way he carried his rifle, with a calm acceptance that both might be needed before the night was through, as he guided his horse past a leaning split-rail fence. He noticed movement by the hog pen. At first he thought it might be a coyote, thin and desperate, nosing its way toward easy pickings. But when he drew closer, he saw the shape was not wild beast at all. It was smaller, hunched low, and trembling as it dug into the trough. Sound reached him, then a faint scrape of fingers and slop, the quick, muffled breaths of someone trying not to be heard. He pulled the reins, let the horse stand, and kept himself still as stone. He had seen many strange sights across the wild country, but this one rooted him. A maiden, thin as a reed and covered in dust, crouched beside the pigs, scooping up what they hadn't yet trampled under hoof. Her hair hung in matted strands, her dress little more than a ragged cloth clinging to her bones. She didn't look up at the horse or the rider. She was too busy shoveling whatever she could into her mouth, eyes wide with fear that someone might rip even this miserable meal away. The Apache's chest tightened, not with pity alone, but with something older, something closer to recognition. He knew hunger in a way few men did. He knew what it meant to chew bitter roots, to boil leather until it softened enough to swallow, to keep living when the land seemed set against you. Yet to see a young woman brought this low, forced to crouch beside hogs in the cold night, just to keep her stomach from gnawing itself hollow, that stirred him in a way the years had not managed to numb. He eased one hand down toward the rifle at his side, not out of threat but caution. No soul lasted long out here without danger clinging close. If she was alone, she would not survive the week. If she was not alone, then whoever had left her in such a state might come looking. The maiden finally paused, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and froze. Perhaps it was the horse's breath, visible in the moonlight, or the faint squeak of the saddle leather that betrayed him. Her head snapped up, and in her eyes he saw a fire born not from strength, but from desperation. She looked like a cornered animal, ready to claw or run, though both would mean little against the night. For a moment neither spoke. The only sounds were the restless pigs and the far-off cry of a coyote. The rider's voice, when it came, was low and steady, shaped by the cadence of a man used to silence. "You'll sicken yourself with that," he said, not unkindly. The girl clutched a lump of half-rotten corn to her chest as though it were gold. "Better sick than empty," she answered, her voice raw and thin. Barely more than a whisper, but carrying the sharpness of truth. He studied her, weighing his choices. The land did not often offer up strangers without reason. Every meeting had a price, whether in blood, trust, or time. He knew better than most how mercy could become a chain, how kindness could drag a man into battles that were not his own. Yet he did not turn his horse away. Something about her eyes, hollow but unbroken, held him there. The night air grew colder. The hogs grunted and pressed against the trough, annoyed at her intrusion. She shrank back, but her hunger betrayed her, pulling her gaze once more to the swill. The Apache dismounted, boots striking the earth with quiet weight. He did not draw. Closer? Not yet. He simply stood between her and the wider dark, a tall figure outlined against the fence. She watched him with suspicion sharp as broken glass. "Where's your kin?" he asked, her lips pressed tight, as though even words were a resource she could not afford to waste. At last she shook her head. "Gone," she said. One word, but it carried a graveyard's worth of meaning. The Apache felt the weight of it. He had buried his own share of voices to silence. He knew the hollowness that came after. He also knew she would not last long on swill and scraps. His horse shifted, snorted, as if impatient with the standoff. He reached into the leather pouch at his side and pulled free a strip of dried venison. The girl's eyes locked on it instantly, betraying her need before she could harden her face. He tossed it lightly so it landed near her feet. She stared at it, then back at him, mistrust wrestling with hunger. At last, she snatched it up, holding it close like treasure, yet still she did not eat. She was waiting, testing, searching his face for the cruelty that life had taught her to expect. "Eat," he said. Slowly she tore a piece with her teeth. Relief softened her features, just a shade. For the first time he noticed the youth still hidden beneath the dirt and hollow cheeks. She had not yet crossed into the kind of hardness that made men forget they were once children. But that line was close, too close. He turned his gaze back to the tree line, to the long shadows stretching eastward. The night had grown too quiet. A man alone could pass unseen across the prairie, but two together drew notice, and notice often came with blood. Somewhere beyond the dark hills dogs barked, faint but rising. He could not tell if they were chasing coyote or if they belonged to men searching for something or someone. The maiden stiffened at the sound, clutching the meat tighter. Her eyes darted to the riders, wide and frightened, as though she expected him to vanish and leave her to whatever fate those dogs promised. He met her gaze steadily, his face unreadable, but inside him a decision was taking root. The Apache knew the wilderness did not forgive weakness, nor did it offer safe places for the lost. Yet in that moment, he understood. Her fight to survive was about to become his burden too, whether he willed it or not. The dogs barked again, closer now. The night shifted, holding its breath. The maiden's hand trembled. The Apache reached for his rifle, and the stillness broke. The hogs startled first, grunting and shoving at the trough as if they too felt the pulse of danger riding on the wind. The maiden froze, crouching lower, her hands still clinging to the strip of dried venison. The Apache lifted his head, listening past the restless noise of animals and the whisper of pine needles overhead. Dogs, their bark was not wild. Not the sharp cry of coyote or the lone howl of wolf. This sound carried discipline, the kind men trained into beasts that hunted more than game. It rose and fell in unison, coming nearer with every breath of night air. He did not speak. Not yet. His silence was a shield, and it gave him time to measure the ground, the girl, and whatever trail had led her here. The maiden's shoulders quivered as if she expected to be dragged from the mud at any moment. Fear like that was not born from hunger alone. Someone had driven her to the pen, and someone was still hunting. The Apache's eyes moved back to her. She had the look of someone who had run for days without shelter, skin stretched thin over bone, every breath a test of how long she could endure. Yet the fire in her eyes, even dulled by exhaustion, refused to die out. He recognized it. He had carried that same spark across deserts where the sun seemed bent on burning men into dust. The girl did not need to tell her story for him to sense the truth. She was not out here by choice. The dogs barked again, sharper now. The Apache's horse tossed its head, hooves scuffing against hard ground. He laid a calming hand on the reins. Though his other hand never strayed far from the rifle at his side, the girl's breath came fast and shallow. Her body tensed as though every muscle begged her to run. But she stayed crouched, waiting for his judgment. "Who follows you?" I asked at last, his voice low, steady as a river stone. Her lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head, but the movement was too quick, too frightened to hold truth. She pressed her hand against her chest, as if she could quiet her own heartbeat before it betrayed her. The Apache studied her a moment longer. He did not press. Answers torn from a throat too raw with fear, often twisted into lies, and lies wasted. Time. The wind carried another sound then, faint but sure, the creak of wagon wheels, the muffled shout of a man urging the dogs. Whoever was out there was close. He made his decision in silence, stepped forward, slow enough not to send her fleeing. She flinched when he reached for her arm, but he did not grip hard. His hand was steady, firm without cruelty. "Come," he said. She looked at him, startled, then at the darkness beyond the fence. For a heartbeat she hesitated, torn between fear of the stranger before her and fear of the ones closing in. The Apache did not wait longer, guided her toward the horse, lifting her light frame with one arm as though she were a bundle of dry sticks. She gasped, clutching the saddle horn as he swung up behind her. The horse, sensing the urgency in his movements, stepped lively, ears pricked forward. The Apache leaned low, pressing the animal into the deeper shadows of the trees. The girl clung tight, silent but trembling. The dried venison still clutched in her hand like a token of survival. As they moved away from the pen, the rider cast one last glance back. Lantern light flickered in the distance now, bobbing through the trees, carried by men who knew what they sought. The dogs yelped, straining against their leads. He turned the horse eastward, away from the open road, choosing instead the narrow deer paths twisting through brush and stone. Few men dared track such ground in darkness. He was counting on that. The maiden's breath brushed against his sleeve, quick and shallow. She tried to speak but swallowed the words. At last, in a voice thin as thread, she asked, "Why?" The Apache did not answer right away. His eyes scanned the ridge ahead, always searching for signs of pursuit. When he did speak, his words were simple. "Because you are not pig," he said. The silence that followed carried more weight than speech. The girl held her tongue, but he felt her body ease just a fraction, as though his words had placed some small distance between her and the shame of the trough. Yet relief was a fragile thing, and it broke quickly when another howl rose behind. Them closer now, joined by the crack of a whip. He urged the horse faster, weaving through the dark. The land here was not forgiving jagged rock, thick brush, gullies cut deep by storm water. But this land was no stranger to him. He had ridden it, walked it, bled upon it. Each turn of the trail felt like an old memory, and he trusted the memory. To keep them ahead of those who gave chase, the girl pressed close, one hand clutching the saddle, the other still holding tight to the strip of meat. He wondered how long she had been running before hunger drove her to the hog pen. He wondered who had set the dogs on her trail. He wondered most of all what kind of past could strip a young woman of everything, yet leave enough fire for her to survive. The horse slowed as they reached higher ground, its breath steaming in the cold. The Apache pulled it to a stop beneath a stand of twisted oaks. He slid from the saddle and motioned for her to stay quiet. She obeyed, though her wide eyes never left him. He crouched low, scanning the valley below. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies in the distance. The dogs barked, their cries carried up the slope. The men behind them were determined. He returned to the horse, laying a hand on its damp neck. The girl whispered, "They won't stop." He nodded. "No, they won't." Her throat worked, as though she wanted to ask who he was, or why he had chosen to help, but the words never came. He did not offer his name. Names carried weight, and weight was a dangerous thing to give away under the stars. Instead, he reached for his water pouch and handed it to her. She drank greedily, then coughed, unaccustomed to the sudden relief. "You should sleep," he told her. "We ride when the moon sinks lower." She stared at him, startled. "If they find us?" The Apache's hand brushed the rifle slung across his back. His voice was calm, not boastful, but certain. "Then they will wish they hadn't." They shivered, though not from cold alone. He turned his gaze back toward the horizon, where the lanterns still flickered, steady as a promise. He knew this was only the beginning. Whoever those men were, they would not abandon their hunt. They carried the kind of determination that came from possession, from ownership, from a belief that the girl was theirs to claim. The maiden curled against the saddle, too exhausted to resist the pull of rest, Now sleep came only in fragments, broken by the distant calls of dogs. The Apache stood watch. Every line of his body carved from the long habit of a man who trusted neither dark nor silence. The night crept on, heavy and unrelenting. The cries of pursuit faded, then swelled again, never vanishing completely. It was a game of distance now, of time and patience, and the Apache knew both well. Still, he could not ignore the gnawing question. Who was this girl, and what fire burned behind her hollow eyes that made men loose dogs into the wilderness? The answer would come, but not yet. The hunt pressed on, and the shadows stretched long before them. The Apache adjusted the rifle across his shoulder, listening once more to the rhythm of the night. The dogs had not given up. The men behind them were closer than before. The land was wide, but not wide enough to hide forever. He looked at the girl. Sleeping fitfully against the saddle, her fingers still locked around the last of the venison, her fight was not done, neither was his, and as the moon slid lower, painting the ridges in pale silver, the Apache understood the truth. Their stories were now bound together, and the dark that followed would test them both in ways neither could yet see. Dawn came like a slow breath through the trees, thin light seeping into the gullies and laying a pale line along the ridge. Apache woke the girl with a touch to her shoulder, and she startled, clutching for what little she owned. He handed her the last dry piece of meat and broke a heel of hard bread he had kept wrapped in cloth. She ate with care this time, small bites, as if she had learned in the night that not every hand would snatch her food away. Below them, the valley lay quiet, the lanterns gone, but the quiet felt like a blanket thrown over live coals. It hid heat, not peace. They moved before the sun cleared the peaks. The Apache cut across shale and scrub, putting stone under the horse's hooves rather than soft ground that kept prints. The girl asked nothing, and he offered little, kept turning. To study the wind and the faint marks that even a careful rider left behind. Twice he stopped, crouched, and sifted the dust through his fingers. Each time he stood and changed course without a word. The girl watched him work with the same alertness she had used to keep her place at a trough. Survival had taught her too. Read people fast. Near mid-morning they dropped into a wash where willow roots gripped the banks and the water ran thin over brown stones. The Apache let the horse drink and filled his canteen. He gave the girl a sliver of jerky, then took out a strip of rawhide and began binding the horse's tail to reduce swish marks that could catch a tracker's eye. She stared at his hands, then at the stream. They had dogs, she said finally, voice low, and a wagon. He nodded. Men who work wide country like wagons, men who want to bring back what runs. He kept his tone even, not to frighten her more, but the truth stood at his back like a tall shadow. Men who use dogs, and wagons often answered to someone with land and coin. She closed her eyes and drew a slow breath. If I tell you, you'll think I am a fool. I will think you are still breathing, he said. Fools do not get this far, she told him in short pieces, careful, skipping the parts that hurt. A ranch north of the salt flats, far beyond. The cottonwoods. A foreman with a soft voice and hard eyes who let debts build like storm clouds. Work in the kitchen, pay always just a little less than promised. A winter without pay, then spring with new rules. Men with boots in the doorway, voices in the hall, threats that grew like weeds. She ran on a Sunday before sunrise. She took nothing but the dress on her back and the will to keep walking. For 3 days she lived on roots and river weeds. The fourth, she found the hog pen, and shame rose up, but hunger pushed it down. Her words were plain, the way people speak when they carry more weight than language can hold. The Apache listened without changing his face. He had seen foremen like that, and the men who stood behind them, men who used ledgers and hired guns to fence the world in. He knew the scale of such hands and how little one rider could weigh against them. Yet there was power and truth told under open sky. It made the next choice clean. We cannot ride the road, he said. If they use law by day and dogs by night, the road is where both meet. We take the high canyons. There is a camp I know, a trader who minds his own business. He will feed us without questions. After that, We learn who wants you back and why. Her eyes lifted at that last word. Why, she repeated, and the way she said it told him she had asked herself 100 times. They rode until the heat began to rise, then led the horse up a shelf of sandstone to a cave the Apache knew from seasons past. The cave opened like a mouth to the west, and a thin stream dripped from the back wall into a pool rimmed with lime. It was a good place to sit in shade and let the dust settle. He gathered dry needles and set a small fire no taller than his. Hand smoke, feathering along the cave roof, hidden from the sky. As they ate, the girl's eyes kept sliding to the cave mouth, the way a deer watches a brush line. He broke the quiet with questions, not sharp, not quick. What did the foreman say when men fell sick? Who owned the land by name? What brand was burned into the cattle? What sign was hung on the ranch road? She answered as best she could. There was a brand shaped like a crooked spur. There was a big house with white paint that peeled near the porch. The man who came to the kitchen door wore a hat with a dark ribbon and a ring on his smallest finger. He had a laugh that sounded like someone striking a flint. She did not know the owner's name. People used titles more than names. Boss, Mr. Sir, remembered a ledger with red lines and the way the foreman tapped a page when someone argued. She had not seen the sheriff for months. Men in blue coats had visited once, bought 2 steers, and left before sundown. The Apache held those pieces like stones and turned them in his mind. A crooked spur brand, a ledger with red lines, a ring. He had passed through a town 2 summers back where a rancher with a spur brand had hired men to push small families off creek land. That ranch stood north and west. He could not be sure it was the same hand, yet the smell of it was familiar. When the heat faded, they pushed out of the cave and climbed higher. The land lifted into a tangle of box canyons and broken ledges. Jaybirds flashed between junipers. A hawk circled above the ridge, waiting for something small to make a mistake. The Apache chose paths that kept them under stone and shadow, always. A bend ahead of any eye on the valley floor. By late day, they came upon the trader's camp nestled, where 2 pale cliffs leaned together. A canvas awning stretched between poles. Crates were stacked in tidy rows. A wagon without its team sat wheel-chalked. The trader stood beside a small iron stove, turning a pan of beans. He had a face like dry bark, and a way of looking that measured. "Without prying, rider," the trader said, nodding to the Apache. His gaze went to the girl and back. "You bring weather with you." "Wind from the north," the Apache replied. It was an old greeting between men who preferred to speak sideways in a world that listened too hard. "Wind can turn," the trader said. But he set out to tin plates and gave the girl the larger share. He asked no names, counted coin only. After the plates were empty, he sold them flour and a twist of tea, a small sack of dried fruit, and leather ties to mend the Apache's saddle. Then he put away his scale as if the trade were done. It was not done. Not truly. He poured 2 cups of coffee and leaned on the crate. "I saw riders at the mouth of the wash," he said, in the same mild voice he had used to ask about salt. "Not close enough to smell their horses, but close enough to know they were town dust, not trail dust. Dogs in the bed of a wagon. The dogs were restless, not trained for cattle, trained for something that screams when cornered. I figure they are a day behind. 2, if you cut through stone." The girl's hand tightened around the tin cup. The Apache placed his cup down and asked a single question. "Crooked spur." The trader's eyes flicked once. He nodded. "Owner sits 3 chairs behind the bar at sundown, feet on a nail keg. Likes to speak of law while he plays cards with a preacher and a man who carries a short whip. Foreman rides with a quiet smile. Folks tell the sheriff stories, and the sheriff writes them in the air with his finger, then moves on. There's talk of a stranger, too. Fellow with a clean coat and a book that looks like a Bible, but isn't. He took notes and never touched his drink. He asked a lot about labor and debt. Folks told him what he wanted to hear. The Apache knew the type. An agent sent by someone in a city who wanted a neat tale that fit into columns. He also knew that when men with rings and ledgers mixed with men who spoke of law, those who suffered war, no badge. He thanked the trader with a nod. The trader lifted a shoulder, as if to say it was nothing, and slid a small parcel across the crate. For a long road, the trader said, "No charge." Inside were 2 sugar lumps and a strip of smoked fish wrapped in paper. The girl looked ready to weep at such simple grace. She didn't. She folded her hands and thanked him, voice steady. They left the camp before sunrise. The trader watched them go, then turned to his stove without a backward glance. He understood that too much attention could be a kind of harm. As they climbed, the girl spoke more freely. The words came like water when a dam starts to fail. She told the Apache of a friend in the kitchen, a woman who sang soft when the pots clanged loud. The friend had once tried to leave and came back limping. Not from a whip, she said in a fierce rush, but from a hole in the ground she had not seen along the road. The foreman had watched her limp and said she was lucky to return to work. Girl had wanted to argue, but the friend had given a small shake of the head, so she swallowed her words and waited. Later, the friend pressed a crust into her hand and whispered where the low fence was weak. The Apache listened, hearing the absence in the tale as much as the words. He did not ask how the friend fared now, did not add weight where there was. Already enough, they reached a narrow ledge that opened onto a hidden valley, no wider than a man could run in 10 minutes. A spring bubbled at the far end, and quaking aspens shivered over it. Birds flitted, careless for a moment in the safety of green leaves. The Apache let the horse rest and set a small snare along a rabbit path. He showed the girl how to hide. The cord beneath dust and leaf, she watched with bright focus, and then made one herself. When she finished, he tested it with a twig and gave the smallest nod. Her mouth twitched as if a smile tried to form and remembered the world it lived in. They stayed in that place until evening, then moved again, careful, quiet. Twice the Apache stopped and let the land speak. Once he pressed his ear to the ground and felt a far tremor that could have been wagon wheels. Once he found a scuff on a rock that matched a wide heel and a nail pattern he had seen outside the eye. Trader's awning. The heel showed weight on the outer edge. A man with a bad knee or a habit of standing with pride that tipped him away from the world. He filed it away. Pride left marks. They camped in a split between 2 boulders where the wind did not reach. As the girl chewed a piece of dried fruit, the Apache laid out the choices clean on the ground between them. Go south to the mining road and hope to win the sheriff with a story that had no paper behind it. Go east and vanish into a scrubland where water was more rare than mercy. Or go north and find the man who used the crooked spur and learn what thread he planned to pull when men like him spoke of law. The girl did not look away. North, she said, and her voice did not shake. North means danger, he said. South means chains you cannot see, she answered. East means dying slow. He nodded once. The choice was made, before sleep. Took them, the Apache set a circle of small stones and left a single gap facing west. It was an old sign among people who rode without flags, a quiet way to tell a friendly eye that the camp was under watch. At first light, he found the nearest scrub oak and cut 2 branches to drag behind the horse. Wiping out their tracks along the softer stretches, the girl learned to walk in the shadow of the horse and to step on stone where she could. She moved with the rough grace of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors. It was not true, but need can teach what years will not. The day stretched. Heat lay flat on the rock. Cloud of dust far off to the south rose and then faded. The Apache watched it until it became the same color as the sky. Not a storm, not a herd. A column too thin to be many riders. He had the sense of eyes upon them that no sight could prove. The feeling did not leave. Near sundown, they reached the edge of a tableland that fell away in steps toward a plain. The Apache pointed. There, he said. A line shack where hands sleep when they ride fence too far from the main house. We can water the horse. We do not stay. The smell of old smoke and dry straw met them. The shack leaned against itself, boards warped, window shutter hanging by a single nail. A tin cup lay on the step, rust licking its rim. The horse pushed his nose toward the trough and snorted at the stale water. The Apache lifted the lid on a barrel and found a thin pool at the bottom. He dipped with care and gave the horse enough to wet his mouth. Inside the shack, the girl found a dull knife and a coil of twine. She looked to him, and he nodded. Tools were the difference between a long road and short hope. On the far wall, above a crude table, hung a horseshoe nailed upside down, luck kept in, or luck spilled out, depending on who told the tale. Scratched into the wood beside it were marks like a child might make when counting days. 20, then a slash, then 5 more. Below the marks, a single word carved with patience. Mercy. They left before night took the ground. The shack felt like a place where forgotten things waited, and the Apache trusted forgotten things less than the men who chased them. As they climbed back to higher stone, a rifle shot cracked from the south. What's not close, but sound carries at dusk. The girl flinched, and the horse threw his head. The Apache drew them into a fold of rock and counted heartbeats. Another shot followed, then a dog's distant cry. He smelled the sour curl of burned powder on the wind, faint, like a bad memory. He kept them still until the stars pricked the sky and the cool rose from the stone. When they moved again, he chose a line east of the trail he had planned. Harder, steeper, safer only for those who knew how to place a boot where goats placed theirs. The girl stumbled once, caught herself, and kept going. There was a fierceness in that small recovery that told him more than any speech. She did not ask for rest, so he called it for her, and she obeyed as if that too were a kind of work. They slept in turns. When it was her watch, she sat with her back against the horse's shoulder and hummed a tune so faint it might have been wind on grass. When he took her place, he listened to the land the way a reader listens to pages turning. Somewhere out there, men with town dust on their boots and rings on their fingers were lining up their next move. Somewhere behind them, a friend who sang by the sink might be counting days in scratches. He had lived long enough to know one road seldom fixed all wrongs. But a road taken with clear eyes could set a new course. At first light, he cut a track. North and kept it, passing under cliffs that glowed like hot iron under the sun. By noon they saw cattle dust to the west, and a fence line that ran straight as a ruler across land that had never grown straight on its own. Past the fence, toward the horizon, a pale house stood out, windows like blank eyes. He lifted the spyglass he kept tucked in a saddle roll and studied the yard. A man sat with his boots on a keg. Another stood beside a post and tapped something thin against his thigh. Beyond the house, a small line of buildings huddled like a nervous town, as if the ranch had sprouted a settlement from its roots. The girl drew a long breath and let it out slow. Her jaw set. The Apache handed her the glass. She took it and looked, and when she lowered it, her face had changed. Not into hardness only, but into something steadier. She was not prey now, she was witness. "We go closer," the Apache said, "but we stay unseen. We learn what truth wears when it wants to be heard." They left the ridge and slipped into a dry creek bed choked with rabbit brush. For an hour, they moved without lifting their heads above the bank. When the ground rose, he belly-crawled to the edge and watched the yard again. More men had come out. He counted them, and the rifles he could see. A wagon rolled in with dogs in the back, tongues lolling. One dog lifted its head and sniffed the air as if it could sense a story hiding in the brush. The Apache felt the girl's presence beside him, steady now, eyes fixed on the crooked spur, burned into a post near the gate. Heat rippled over the plain. The men laughed at something the one with the ring said. The sound of that laugh rose up, thin and sharp, and cut the air between the yard and the creek bed. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been decided. What? Lay ahead would test steel and spirit both. Yet as the Apache eased back from the edge and met the girl's gaze, the same thought moved through them like a shared breath. The road north had brought them to the heart of the conflict. And the next step could not be taken lightly. Far behind them, faint as dust, a second wagon crested a low rise and paused, as if the men aboard could not decide whether to follow the first path or make one of their own. The sun inched down, the shadows stretched, and the land held its breath. Waiting to see who would move first, the dogs in the wagon sniffed and strained. their ears sharp against the sky, and the sound of chains rattling against wood carried across the dry plain. The girl tensed beside the Apache, her hand tightening on the grass at the lip of the creek bed. He put a hand on her arm, not to comfort, but to hold her steady. Movement was danger, and danger was already close enough to taste. He counted the men again. 3 near the porch, 2 more at the gate, another in the wagon seat, 7 at least, likely more inside the White House with its peeling boards. Too many for a straight fight, too many for a lone rider and a half-starved girl to break through. The Apache measured the land instead of the men. Fences stretched like ribs across the valley. A windmill creaked, blades turning slow. A pile of lumber sat near a shed, and beyond it, a corral where the cattle pressed together as if they too felt the weight of trouble in the air. The girl handed the spyglass back. Her jaw locked, her breath sharp. She had seen the man with the ring, lounging with his boots crossed, his laugh like flint on steel. That sound was enough to carry her memory back to the kitchen where debts piled higher than the flour sacks. Her shoulders shook once, but she swallowed it, hard, and her face steadied again. The Apache marked the change. Whatever fear still lived in her had burned down into something harder. The men below were not idle. 2 of them led the dogs to water, then tested their noses with scraps of cloth. The Apache leaned closer, squinting. The cloth was rough, gray-brown, the kind of rag a servant might wear, or drop along a road. They were training the dogs to her scent. His hand slid toward the rifle, but he stopped short, too far. A shot now would light a fire too soon. Instead, he eased them back down the bank, motioning for silence. They crept along the dry creek bed, every step placed with care, until the ridge hid them from sight of the ranch yard. The girl finally whispered, "They know?" "Yes," he answered. His voice was flat. "They will come this way soon." The sun dropped lower, shadows stretching long and thin. They moved through thorn brush and up a narrow ravine where boulders leaned like toppled walls. The Apache stopped at the top and looked back. Dust rose faintly behind the wagon on the plain. A second line of dust trailed far to the east, too small to be cattle. He knew then the hunt had spread wide, men riding not only from the ranch but from town as well. The crooked spur had sent word, and the law that wore no badge had answered. The girl caught her breath when she saw the dust lines. "There's no end to them," she whispered. "There is an end," the Apache said, "but not yet." They pressed higher into the canyons, where stones swallowed sound and only the hawks circled. The Apache knew paths where even dogs lost scent, where water trickled under rock and left no trail. He guided the horse into one such cut narrow enough that the girl had to walk single file behind. Her dress caught on thorns, but she pulled free without complaint. Sweat streaked her face, dust clung to her hair, yet her eyes burned brighter with each mile. When darkness came, they lit no fire. They shared cold bread, a strip of smoked fish, and drank from a spring that seeped through a crack in stone. The girl lay down against her bundle, but she did not sleep. She watched the stars through the break in the canyon roof, silent, her lips moving as if she whispered to someone unseen. The Apache sat near the horse, rifle across his knees, eyes on the black mouth of the ravine. He listened for the far-off cry of dogs. When it came, faint and ghostly, he did not stir, only counted the distance in his head. At dawn he woke, her with a hand on her shoulder. "We go north," he said. She nodded. No questions, only resolve. They moved fast that day, crossing ridges and dropping into valleys, always weaving, never leaving a clear trail. But the chase closed in. Mid-morning, the sound of a horn echoed through the canyon. Men were driving the hunt like a herd, pushing the quarry toward some place of their choosing. The Apache knew the trick well. They wanted to corner them, not kill in open chase. By noon, they reached a mesa, where the wind blew hard and the stone held heat like a forge. From the edge, they saw the land spread wide, and on that land, riders fanned like black ants. Dust clouds rose in 3 directions. The crooked spur meant to catch them between, The girl gripped the edge of the rock. "What do we do?" she asked. The Apache's eyes scanned the far horizon. A narrow line of green lay beyond the dust, the promise of river trees. Shelter, maybe, or trap. Either way, it was the only path left. He pointed. "There," he said. "We reach that before night." They rode hard, the horse lathered and trembling, but steady. The girl held on without complaint. Behind them, the dogs bayed, closer now, their cries weaving into the wind. The Apache forced the horse down into arroyos, splashing through shallow streams to scatter scent. Still, the chase gained. He could feel it in the way the land seemed to shiver under the pounding of many hooves. Late in the day, storm clouds gathered to the west, dark and heavy. Lightning flickered on the far rim, thunder rolling slow. The Apache knew storms could be friend or foe. Rain might wash away tracks, but it could also trap them in flood. He weighed the skies carefully. As the ground, when twilight came, they reached the edge of the river trees. The horse staggered, sides heaving. The Apache slid down, pulling the reins. The girl followed, her face pale but steady. Together they entered the tangle of willows and cottonwoods. The air grew cooler, the sound of water close. Inside the trees, shadows wrapped around them. The Apache led them to a hollow, where the roots of an old cottonwood formed a wall. He motioned the girl down, then climbed a low rise to scout. Through the branches he saw lanterns flicker on the plain.
Ow.
Men were closing the circle. The dogs' cries rang sharper, louder, echoing through the trees. He returned to the hollow. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide but not broken. "There. Close, aren't they?" "Yes," he said. "Then this is where it ends," she whispered. "Not yet," he replied. His voice carried no promise of safety, only the weight of a man who had stood too often at the edge of endings. The storm broke then. Rain lashing the trees, thunder cracking overhead. The river swelled, rushing against its banks. The dogs faltered, their cries scattered in the downpour, but the men shouted louder, driving them on. The girl pressed against the roots, trembling, as the Apache crouched beside her, rifle ready. The rain blurred the world into streaks of gray, but through the blur, lantern lights still moved closer. The hunt had driven them to this place, and the circle was nearly closed. The storm howled, the dogs bayed, and the men shouted. The girl's hand found the Apache's sleeve, gripping tight, as if holding to the last thread of hope. He said nothing, only lifted his rifle and watched the dark shapes moving through the trees. The moment stretched, heavy as the storm. Every sound, the crack of thunder, the crash of water, the bark of a dog tightened the coil of tension until the air itself seemed ready to snap. The girl drew in a breath, sharp and trembling. The Apache's finger brushed the trigger. Circle closed, and then the night itself seemed to hold still, waiting for the first spark that would set fire to all that followed. The storm raged so hard, the lantern light wavered and blurred, and the dogs lost their rhythm in the wind and rain. The Apache kept still, holding the girl against the roots of the cottonwood, waiting for the shapes in the trees to show themselves clear. The men shouted to one another, their voices broken by thunder. He could tell from the sound that the circle was not tight enough. Storm and darkness had carved gaps, and in those gaps lay their one chance. He touched the girl's arm and motioned with 2 fingers toward the river. She hesitated only a breath, then nodded. Together they crawled low, sliding through wet grass and mud, every move swallowed by the roar of the storm. Behind them, the dogs barked again, closer now, but their noses fought the flood of water pouring. Across the land, one dog howled sharp, then another, but the Apache knew confusion when he heard it. At the riverbank, swollen and wild, the girl faltered. "We can't cross," she whispered, voice trembling. He looked at the rushing water, then at her. "We do," he said, and pulled her hand into his. With the horse tethered close, they stepped into the flood. Water rose to their waists, cold and biting, pushing against them like a living thing. The girl clung to his arm, the horse snorted, and fought the current. But the Apache moved steady, planting each step on the riverbed with weight and care. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment, the whole scene shone white. Two figures. One beast, pressing through fury with no path but forward. They reached the far bank, gasping, soaked, yet alive. Behind them the shouts dimmed, swallowed by rain. In distance, the dogs barked along the other shore, but the flood held them back. The girl collapsed to her knees, clutching the mud, her breath coming fast. He pulled her up, guiding her into the trees. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mist rose from the wet earth, and birds called cautiously, testing the morning. They found a hollow in the rocks where they could rest, and for the first time in many nights, sleep came without fear of a shout breaking it. When the girl woke, the Apache was already mending his rifle strap, the sun low on the horizon. She sat up slowly, hair tangled, clothes stiff with dried mud. Her eyes searched his face. "We made it," she said softly. For now he answered, but there was a different weight in his tone. The hunt was broken. The storm had given them a chance, and they had taken it. The crooked spur and his men might still roam, but the chase had lost its teeth. Over the next days they traveled north at a slower pace. The land grew greener, hills rolling into valleys dotted with wildflowers. The girl walked lighter, her steps less burdened by dread. She asked questions about the plants he gathered, about the way he read the ground for signs. He answered simply, showing her how to spot rabbit tracks, how to tell if water ran clean or foul. She listened as if each word was a tool she could keep. In one valley, they came upon a small cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. An old couple lived there, bent with years but quick with kindness. They gave them bread warm from the oven and a place by the fire. The girl's eyes filled when she tasted the bread, but she swallowed the tears with the food. The old woman laid a hand on her shoulder and said nothing, which was sometimes the greatest kindness of all. That night, as the fire crackled, the Apache spoke of leaving soon, of roads that stretched farther north, where no crooked spur held sway. The girl looked into the flames and nodded. "I don't want to run forever," she said, "but I can't go back. I'd rather start with nothing than live with chains." He studied her then, the set of her jaw, the steady fire in her eyes. She was not the same girl he had found by the hog pen. Hunger had carved her, but resolve had shaped her. "Starting with nothing is still starting," he said. They left the cabin with packs of food and blessings. Each mile carried them farther. From the reach of men who hunted with ledgers and rings, the girl grew stronger and laughter began to return in small sparks, surprising even her. Once when the horse sneezed after drinking too fast, she laughed so sudden she covered her mouth, as if she had done something forbidden. The Apache only looked at her, quiet, but inside he felt the ground grow lighter. In time, they reached a town where the crooked spur's name carried no weight. It was small, built around a single dusty street, but there was work, and there was no one asking for papers or debts. The girl found a place in a seamstress's shop, her hands quick with a needle. The Apache traded hides and guided wagons through rough country when settlers needed it. Days grew into weeks, and the sound of dogs in the night faded into memory. One evening, sitting outside the shop, the girl spoke of her friend in the kitchen back on the ranch, the one who sang when pots clanged. "I don't know if she ever found a way out," she said, "but I'll remember her as the one who gave me courage. If not for her, I wouldn't have tried the fence." The Apache nodded. "We carry those who help us, even if we walk without them," she smiled then, faint but sure. "Then I will carry her." The town came to know her as quiet but steady, a girl who had seen more than her years should allow. They came to know him as a man who worked hard and asked little. Together, they were a reminder that survival was not only about fighting, but about finding places where life could grow again. Seasons turned. The land that had once been nothing but chase and shadow became a place where they could breathe, yet neither forgot the crooked spur. Sometimes when a traveler brought news from the south, they listened, weighing each word. Rumors came of debts unpaid, of hands leaving the ranch, of men riding off when the law finally stirred. Perhaps the storm had broken more than one chase that night, in the end. The story was not of one rancher or one pursuit, but of two people who refused to bend under the weight of hunger and fear. The girl found her strength not in vengeance, but in survival, in turning her back on chains and choosing her own road. The Apache found his purpose not only in guiding her through the dark, but in seeing her stand steady on her own feet. The last time they spoke of the chase, it was late summer, the sky rich with stars. The girl sat with her back against the horse, humming the same tune she once hummed while keeping watch in the canyon. She looked at him and said, "We didn't just escape, did we? We lived." He gave the smallest nod. "Yes," he said, "we lived." The night folded around them then, calm and deep. No dogs barked, no men shouted, no thunder cracked. Only the steady rhythm of life that had once seemed so far away, and so their road, born of hunger and flight, ended in a place of choice and quiet strength. The crooked spur's shadow no longer reached them. What remained was the truth that survival was more than breath, was the courage to walk forward, to build something new out of what once was broken. The girl, no longer hungry at a hog trough, no longer nameless in the eyes of men, had become her own keeper. The Apache, once a lone rider, was no longer alone. Together they left behind the chase, carrying with them the hard lessons and the small mercies that made them whole. Their journey was finished, but its echo lingered for anyone who listened. Freedom is not given, it is taken with courage, kept with resolve, and lived one steady step at a time.